We begin with a bullseye on the Buckeye State, with the president and Mitt Romney just wrapping up their respective speeches in the crucial battleground state of Ohio, essentially going head-to-head in time and place, if not in person, separated by just 250 miles. And the president, in a carefully argued address, deconstructed Mitt Romney as a man who promotes the exact same policies that caused the current crisis.
If you want to give the policies of the last decade another try, then you should vote for Mr. Romney. You should vote for his allies in Congress. You should take them at their word, and they will take America down this path. And Mr. Romney is qualified to deliver on that plan.
And despite their similar circumstances today, the president explained that there is a stark choice that will face voters come November. For those who imagine Mitt Romney as a milquetoast moderate, the president instead cast his opponent in the terms Mr. Romney has used to describe himself: a severe conservative pulled to the far right with the rest of his party.
Their agenda will be simple and straightforward. They have spelled it out. They promised to roll back regulations on banks and polluters, on insurance companies and oil companies. They promise to not only keep all of the Bush tax cuts in place, but add another $5 trillion in tax cuts on top of that. We can't afford to jeopardize our future by repeating the mistakes of the past. Not now, not when there's so much at stake.
And if you ask Ohio voters, the president has an edge. Who caused the bad economy? Not the president. 57% say George W. Bush. Who gets your problems? Not Mitt Romney, the president, with a 13-point lead. And while the president faces serious challenges in framing the fragile recovery, Ohio's improving jobless rate does work to his advantage. The state's 7.4% unemployment is lower than the national rate and down dramatically from a high of 10.6% in late 2009. In Cleveland, where the president spoke, it's even lower, 6.7%. Down in Cincinnati, where Governor Romney gave his address, it's just over 7%. But the president did not merely illustrate what he's done to shore up the economic disaster he inherited. He did what Mr. Romney simply can't do. He laid out a real vision for how his policies would help the middle class.
That's my vision for America. Education, energy, innovation, infrastructure, and a tax code focused on American job creation and balanced deficit reduction. This is the vision I intend to pursue in my second term as president, because I
believe. And while Romney was down in Cincinnati calling for less regulation, more exploitation of fossil fuels, his giant campaign bus was busy wasting gas, driving round the Obama campaign event, honking and taunting the president's supporters. Mature, that, isn't it? We're surprised they didn't put on some fake police uniforms and pull over the president's motorcade. Let's bring in our political panel now. In Washington, MSNBC political analyst David Corn. Stop laughing. Washington bureau chief of Mother Jones magazine and author of the bestseller Showdown. Also in Washington, Chicago Tribune columnist Clarence Page. And with me here in New York is MSNBC contributor and Democratic strategist Crystal Ball. David, this wasn't soaring rhetoric or an anointed preacher. This was much more like a lecture that took us through the past and then brought us up to the present. Is it your view, David, that the president managed to, as it were, reclaim the upper hand today?
I don't know if anyone's speech is going to make that sort of difference, but here's a pop quiz, Martin. What do you think the most important word in the speech was?
Good question. I've no idea. Tell me.
Well, you used it in the intro. It's choice. He wants voters to see this election as a choice election. His vision, his set of policies, and his actions versus Mitt Romney's vision and his policies as defined mostly by the Ryan budget plan that Mitt Romney has endorsed. And Mitt Romney, of course, wants this election to be, not a choice, but wants voters to be angry at Obama, angry about the election. He wants them to vent. He wants this to be a venting election, and Obama wants to say, hey, there's a rational choice here that our future will depend upon what you do. And that's what he laid out here. I do think as we get further into the campaign, he's going to have to move from that professorial explanation of the choice and make it connect on an emotional level as well. But there may still be 1 or 2 days left before November in which that can be done.
Crystal, do you agree with David's analysis there that this was about the president laying out the stark contrast with Romney? And I listened to every word of Romney's speech as well, and it was just more and more nonsense, really. It wasn't focused in policy. He doesn't want to offer an alternative. All he wants to do is bury the president.
Well, I think that's right. And in addition to the contrast that the president laid out in his speech between their two plans and visions for the country, there was a dramatic contrast between the two speeches. President Obama and his kept saying, you know, that's not my spin. Those are just the facts. And these are the independent economists who say so. I'm trying to be very fair here. Here's what they literally want to do. Whereas Romney's speech was much more focused on buzzwords. You know, he went back to the president's alleged gaffe and tried to make hay out of that. It was much less substantive and much more focused on just seizing on that emotion. And so in that way, I think David is right. Romney is trying to make this an election of venting. And we cannot expect, you know, just to rationally lay out the argument and win in November. But there's a time and a place for everything. And I think it was important that the president take some time to go through the history, not because we're focused on blaming Bush, because he wants to say, look, we've been here before. We have tried this model before, and this is exactly what Romney wants to do, except in the words of Bill Clinton, on steroids. So if you thought that was good, if that worked for you, vote for Mitt Romney.
Right. Clarence, the numbers favour the president in Ohio. Unemployment down more than 3% from its recession high, thanks in part to the auto recovery. But can he convince the rest of the country that his prescriptions will heal our economic troubles if he's given more time?
Well, he has to do that in terms of doing what David just suggested, draw a contrast between himself and his vision of the future versus Mitt Romney and his vision, and tie Mitt Romney to the bad news from the Bush years that many in the public don't want to go back to, and tie him to the Republican Congress as well. You heard President Obama doing a lot of that, while Governor Romney was trying to make this a referendum on President Obama himself and his performance in office, which gives a psychological advantage to him in terms of, President Obama came in with such a tremendous exuberance that nobody could maintain that level of enthusiasm. So he paints it as if President Obama has been a failure, whereas he actually has been quite successful in keeping the recovery going. It's just been too slow. So the question is, do people like his version, or do they like Romney's version? Ohio is a great place for President Obama to be campaigning right now because, as you mentioned, the polls are high. The economy is doing very well there, in spite of, largely because of the auto industry recovery, which spilled over favorably into Ohio, and that's a recovery that Governor Romney, he talked about letting the auto companies go bankrupt. So I think maybe to some degree President Obama is testing out some lines here right now that he's going to tighten up, one hopes, for future stump speeches.
Yeah, indeed, because it was quite a lengthy speech. David, Romney spoke today in front of a Putting Jobs First banner, and I guess that's true if you agree with his philosophy, which is, of course, top-down economics and trickle-down. The only problem is it hasn't worked before. But I ask you, David, why is the president having such a hard time discounting that theory, given that it hasn't worked?
Well, you can ask, why Reagan was successful back in the day. I mean, this has been, one of the great, pulls and push-me-pull-you fights in American politics over the past few decades, whether cutting government and giving tax breaks to the rich, the trickle-down theory, has any impact. And we saw the evidence in the Bush years. We saw the evidence in the Clinton years, where he actually raised taxes a bit, not a lot, a bit on the upper income folks, and the economy did just fine, despite the predictions that everything would fall apart. Americans don't like government, they don't like taxes, and so when you prey on those very deep-rooted emotions, some sometimes you have success as a candidate, particularly when times are bad, and you're saying, see, we can do better. We can do better by taxing you less. I mean, that's like a candy store, right?
I've got to hold you all back. Crystal, Clarence, David, you're wonderful.